This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Burkina president calls for help to deal with mine attackers after deadly incident kills 38 people. Reactions to the sentencing of former Congolese military leader Bosco Ntaganda. And South Sudan rival leaders meet in Uganda for peace talks. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. The details on those stories in just a moment, but first, Penina Karibe with the day's business headlines. Penina.
Thank you, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Business, Senegalese-American musician Akon seeks to empower Africa through cryptocurrency. And African farmers challenge to transition to sustainable food and agricultural systems to fight climate change. I'll have details of those stories and plenty more in just a bit. For now, it's back to you, Beatrice.
Penina, thank you. Well, let's begin in Burkina Faso, where at least 38 people have been killed by gunmen in Burkina Faso. The gunmen ambushed a convoy carrying workers of a Canadian mining firm, Semafo. Authorities confirmed dozens were injured in the attack. More on this from CGTN's Kelechi Emekelam.
It was a 5-bus convoy conveying staff of the mining firm to the Bango mine, an open-pit gold mine in the eastern region. The gunmen waylaid them and shot sporadically, killing 37. The governor of the eastern region, Lieutenant Colonel Saido Sano, who confirmed the incident, said another 60 persons were wounded. Many more are still missing, an indication that the death toll may rise. This is the third fatal attack on this Canadian-based company in the last 15 months. There were similar attacks in December 2018 and August of 2019. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. Although Islamic terrorist groups have continued to unsettle the country's north, many suspect the attacks on the company may be as a result of settlement differences between the mining company and locals there. Meanwhile, the firm says it has tightened security for its employees and around the Bango mine and would continue its operations. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Burkina Faso President Roch Kabore is calling on volunteers to sign up and help fight mine attackers.
We must remain firm and courageous. That is why I will engage the defense and security forces to track down the terrorists. And I call on all of our people to mobilize against the terrorists. I ordered the recruitment of volunteers for the defense of our homeland in zones under threat. Only a general mobilization of the sons and daughters of the nation, regardless of their religion, ethnicity, or political opinion and religious faith, can defeat these murderers, faithless and lawless who are dreaming of submitting our nation and our courageous people to their evil ways.
Former Congolese rebel leader Bosco Ntaganda has been sentenced to 30 years in prison for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Nicknamed a Terminator, Ntaganda was convicted on 18 counts, including murder, rape, sexual slavery, and using child soldiers at the International Criminal Court. Kate Fisher reports from The Hague.
Convicted war criminal Bosco Ntaganda remained emotionless as he listened to his sentence.
For rape of civilians as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, 28 years. For murder and attempted murder as a crime against humanity and as a war crime, 30 years. For persecution as a crime against humanity, 30 years of imprisonment. The overall sentence imposed on you shall therefore be 30 years of imprisonment.
The 117-page judgment details the litany of crimes committed by the 46-year-old former rebel leader. They include murder, rape, and the sexual slavery of children. In total, 18 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity for his role in a bloody ethnic conflict in the Ituri region of Congo from 2002 to 2003. This is something of a landmark for the ICC. This is the longest sentence they have ever imposed, and Ntaganda becomes the first person to be convicted of sexual slavery. But Mr. Ntaganda's lawyer told me he doesn't believe that conviction will hold. He says the judgment contains factual and legal errors and that he's confident their appeal will be successful.
He remains strong, whereas most people in the same situation would fall apart. This is not Bosco Ntaganda. Bosco Ntaganda is at peace with himself. He believes that the manner in which he was portrayed, both in the trial judgment and in this morning's sentencing judgment, is not the reality.
But it is reality for Ntaganda's victims, more than 2,000 of whom participated in the trial. They'll be relieved by today's sentence, but now have at least another year to wait for the outcome of his 2 appeals. Kate Fisher, CGTN, The Hague.
Well, let's discuss the significance of this, and I'm joined in studio by Matthias Muindi. He's an independent political risk analyst. Matthias, how significant, though, is Ntaganda's sentencing?
It is very significant because when you look at the condemnation the ICC has endured in the last couple of years, some people used to think that the ICC was not a relevant international, institution. But by this verdict and this sentencing, it shows that the ICC remains a very relevant international institution. And it also shows that victims of any abuses from any armed conflict across the world, they have now an international forum in which they can try to secure justice, no matter how long it takes.
So the DR Congo at the moment is relatively in a stable position. What impact, though, will this sentencing have on the country?
In terms of symbolic impact, it's a very positive development, because now we are seeing on an international scale that the victims of the perpetrators of some of these violence are being held to account. However, we must also acknowledge that some of the militias remain very defiant. They even see Ntaganda as a hero. So some of them are still going to continue with abuses, but the sentences of Ntaganda is a warning shot to these militia groups.
So some of the militias remain defiant despite this, and the Ituri area remains rather volatile. Why has it become difficult to maintain some semblance of peace in that region?
Ituri is mineral rich, and that wealth has become a magnet of a lot of interest, both domestic and foreign. And these are going to continue driving the instability. The other aspect which is driving the instability in Ituri is that the Congolese government lacks the political and the military capacity to defeat some of the militias in that group. And finally, there's entrenched ethnic animosities which continue to perpetuate or maybe to fuel some of its instability. So it's going to take a while before Ituri is pacified, despite the sentencing of Ntaganda to this lengthy prison term.
All right, Matthias Muindi, thank you very much for your update. Well, we are staying with the story for the moment as CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi now takes us back in time, looking at the story of the former rebel leader, also known as the Terminator.
Bosco Ntaganda, a former rebel leader in the Democratic Republic of Congo, became the first person to be found guilty of sexual slavery by the International Criminal Court. In total, he was convicted on 13 counts of war crimes and 5 of crimes against humanity. Ntaganda's crimes include murder and attempted murder, rape, sexual slavery, persecution, forcible transfer and deportation. Ntaganda, nicknamed Terminator, was Deputy Chief of Staff in the Union of Congolese Patriots Group when the crimes were committed in 2002 and 2003. During his trial, Ntaganda was portrayed as the ruthless leader of ethnic Tutsi revolts amid the wars that shook the DRC after the 1994 genocide of Tutsis in the neighboring Rwanda. Judges found that Ntaganda was a key leader in terms of planning and operations for the Union of Congolese Patriots Rebel Group and its military wing, the Patriotic Forces for the Liberation of Congo. The first ever suspect to voluntarily surrender to the ICC, Ntaganda walked into the US Embassy in Kigali in 2013 and asked to be sent to the court. Uganda is also a founding member of the M23 rebel group, which was defeated by Congolese government forces 5 years ago. More than 60,000 people have been killed since the violence erupted in Ituri region in 1999 as militias battle each other for control of scarce mineral resources. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
South Sudan's President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar have agreed to postpone the formation of a coalition government for 100 days. The rival leaders were to have formed a unity government by November the 12th. But after meeting in Uganda for 6 hours on Thursday, they say that security and governance issues needed to be resolved before they could form a government together. It was agreed that during the 100-day period, Uganda, Kenya, Sudan and South Sudan would work with the regional group, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, to resolve all outstanding issues hampering the formation of a new South Sudanese government in which Kiir would be president and Machar one of the vice presidents. Well, let's get you more on this now, and I'm joined by CGTN's Isabel Nakira. She's following those talks for us. Isabel, another extension to the formation of a unity government. Could you give us some of the highlights of that meeting in Uganda?
Yes, Beatrice, we just received the resolutions in our inboxes a few minutes ago, and in it, the meeting agreed that the formation of the unity government should be delayed by 100 days. The meeting noted that critical tasks like the security arrangements and the governance issues have not been tackled yet, and so that's why the delay has been put. And so after 50 days, there will be a review and a report will be made to the heads of state to look at. And after that, they will also look at the issue of the implementation of the critical task in these 100 days. Close supervision by the guarantors of the meeting will be made to ensure that the critical tasks are implemented. And also the meeting also agreed that IGAD would keep in touch with Dr. Riek Machar to make sure that after 100 days that this unity government should probably come into formation, and that the international community should also closely watch on this implementation and also keep supporting the government of South Sudan.
So, Isabel, there are modalities to the extension of the next 100 days and what will happen between now and the next 3 months. But could you take us through the sticky issues that you talk about that are yet to be resolved?
The most sticky issue that has caused the delay is the security arrangement. Formerly, Dr. Riek Machar needed, the agreement was that Dr. Riek Machar's army be incorporated into the national army, and that by the time he moves into South Sudan on the 12th, his army is already into the barracks. But that has not happened. And also the creation of states, that too has not happened. And so those were some of the critical issues that will be tackled during these 100 days. And by the time the 3 months the extension ends, they hope that probably these critical issues should have been tackled, and therefore IGAD member states will come back again on the table and talk to the two warring parties and find out whether all these issues have been tackled, and therefore that's when hopefully the unity government can be created.
Isabel Nakira for us there in Kampala, updating us on South Sudan's peace talks. Now, while President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar meet in Uganda, CGTN's Patrick Oyet takes a look at how citizens in South Sudan are reacting to the stalled peace process.
South Sudan's peace process dictates that a unity government be formed by next Tuesday. However, with just 4 days left to the deadline, the parties disagree on whether the government should be formed as stipulated in the 2018 agreement. In the capital, Juba, people are expressing their views on the lack of progress.
The more we hold, maybe we put some time again. That time will come, and still we might need more time. So time will not always be enough for us. So it's better to start the way it is. Then we will agree as we continue with the government.
You are supposed to form the peace process, because if it will delay, it will look like the peace will not come in South Sudan. So if actually peace will come, there will be no delay. People should have to come together, join their hand, then they sit together, discuss the issues. They finish, then people should have to come together as the South Sudanese.
It is hoped a meeting between President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar in Uganda on Thursday could produce a way forward. The East African regional body, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD, is calling for another meeting of representatives of all parties signatory to the agreement on Friday in Ethiopia. There are 9 opposition groups party to the 2018 agreement. 2 are proposing a postponement of the formation of the government. One of the concerns is lack of funds to complete security sector reforms. President Kiir's government says it has so far released more than $30 million for the peace deal implementation. It says the money is being used in a transparent manner, monitored by representatives of opposition groups.
That money, we have been using it to purchase materials, food and non-food items for the cantonments.
Members of the international community who have been involved in the peace process are urging the parties to form the government as scheduled, but time is running out. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Aid workers warn of a humanitarian crisis as floods ravage South Sudan. And the University of Cape Town tries to make amends over 9 bodies of farm workers taken for research in 1920.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Hundreds of migrants have been evacuated by police from a makeshift migrant camp in Paris, Porte de la Chapelle area. It comes as France's Prime Minister Edouard Philippe announced a raft of measures on immigration on Wednesday. Laia Halpern has more from Paris.
This is the aftermath of the police eviction in northeast Paris. In the early hours of Thursday morning, around 600 French officers began clearing the camp. Hundreds of migrants were taken away by bus to emergency accommodation, where their asylum claims will be processed. The last estimates, however, suggest around 3,000 refugees and migrants were living here in tents, though some may have left the area prior to the eviction taking place. Since the closure of the Calais jungle camp in 2016, many refugees have come to Paris. But the clearing of this camp in the capital was perhaps not unexpected, following an announcement by France's Interior Minister on Wednesday.
We cannot accept the dangerous and unhealthy conditions of some migrant camps. After Grand Sainte, Calais, Nantes in October, we will continue to evacuate the camps. And in particular, we plan to have the camps in northeastern Paris evacuated by the end of the year.
This was part of a number of measures to tighten the country's immigration controls.
Our aim is to make decisions in terms of migration, setting quantitative targets or quotas in the field of professional immigration, putting a package together through integration and through work, limit the issues that hinder the integration process, for example by reducing taxes on residence permits. And at the same time, our role is to protect family immigration by fighting against certain abuses of our immigration policy, or to reaffirm the requirements, firm and strong requirements, for access to French nationality.
In 2018, France received a record number of asylum requests, almost 123,000 of them. That's an increase of 22% on the previous year. The French government is under pressure to tackle the issue of immigration, especially with the rise in popularity of far-right groups like Marine Le Pen's National Rally. And the government has also called for an overhaul of the EU's efforts to curb the flow of migrants fleeing conflict and poverty in Africa, the Middle East and in Asia. But for the evicted migrants in northeast Paris, it's likely that many of them will end up back here on the Paris streets. Leah Heilpan, CGTN, Paris.
Meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency has relocated 54 refugees from Niger to Italy. A first group of 51 people was relocated in November of last year. Most refugees had previously been in detention in Libya. There they faced appalling conditions, human rights abuses, and the risk of being caught up in the country's hostilities. The UNHCR has evacuated refugees and asylum seekers out of Libya to other countries, including Niger and Rwanda, through the emergency transit in operations. 913 people have previously been evacuated out of Libya to Italy since the end of 2017.
Some people I didn't know pushed me into a car. They tied my hands and they blindfolded me. They took me to a place I didn't know with several rooms, and inside there were groups of people of different nationalities.
In Libya, they face terrible conditions, including appalling human rights abuses. UNHCR has evacuated 5,100 refugees from the country since 2017. However, thousands are still at risk. This is why we're calling on more countries to offer places and help us bring people to safety.
Authorities in Somalia are on high alert after a pro-Islamic State group in the country pledged allegiance to ISIL's new leader. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo reports from Mogadishu on how this new development risks undermining recent progress in security.
The Islamic State group faction in Somalia is the latest to pledge allegiance to Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi, who was picked earlier this month to lead the so-called Islamic State following the killing of its former leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi by US forces in northern Syria. The militant group uses this mountainous terrain in northeastern Somalia as a base to grow in strength and numbers. Its leader is this man, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Mu'min, who is tasked with spreading the group's ideology in the Horn of Africa.
And the fact that they are pledging allegiance to the new leader is basically aimed at strategically positioning themselves as an important actor in Somalia. They are a threat, of course, as long as they are armed and as long as they can make explosions in some parts of the country. They are cornered from all sides. On the one side, Al-Shabaab itself is seeing ISIS as a threat. So they have a fight on that front, and they have another fight on the front of the government, and as well as an international pressure from the Americans and others who are in the region.
The group is estimated to have up to 300 active fighters and has been blamed for launching deadly terrorist attacks in the region of Puntland and throughout parts of Somalia. Analysts say the government is not doing much to end the insurgency posed by the so-called Islamic State, despite receiving aerial support from some of its international partners.
I think one of the major problems with the growth of these terrorist networks is that the government is not doing enough to tackle the security problems in the country. So basically, I don't think whether the government is well equipped to deal with the security problems in the country.
The group has been accused of targeting big corporations in the country in order to get funding to sustain its operations. It's unclear whether it's receiving any kind of direct support from Syria and Iraq, where the group's founders maintain a huge presence. Puntland's forces have managed to dislodge the fighters from towns and villages in the Bari Mountains, but they've been unable to access some of the strongholds of the Islamic State group. Analysts now say that a strong military pressure is the only way to counter the growth of ISIL in the Horn of African region. Abdulaziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Aid workers in South Sudan have warned of a looming humanitarian crisis following heavy rains and rising floodwaters that have destroyed homes and livestock. The country declared a national emergency last week after floods forced 420,000 people from their homes. Residents of the eastern town of Pibor are appealing to the government for aid. Severe structural damage to bridges and roads has prevented access to communities whose livelihoods and day-to-day survival is mostly dependent on humanitarian assistance.
We are trying to find different places, but the water apparently is still increasing in this area. Now we are at the airstrip, which we are losing about 40 centimeters per day every day, where the water is increasing. There is a very high humanitarian need of an intervention, especially with shelter material, with NFI kits, with material that can be given to the population, because people have lost everything. They lost their homes, so the intervention is very needed in this sector.
In South Africa, cutting-edge science has been used in a landmark restitution program to redress injustices of the past. In 1920, the University of Cape Town procured the skeletal remains of 9 farm workers. Their bodies were donated by a farmer and used for science. Now, 80 years later, the university is making amends. UCT has put together a multidisciplinary team of experts to piece together the identities of those 9 individuals. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews.
It's an unveiling that has brought feelings of sorrow, but also one of justice. After 2 years of painstaking work, the faces of these farm workers can finally be revealed. 9 individuals were dug up in the Sutherland region and handed over to the university. It was an unethical act, which included the desecration of their graves for scientific purposes. But now the university is attempting to make amends.
People were brought to UCT as part of a science project, right? And so in that way, as a university, we were complicit in race science. And of course, our view as the executive in 2017, when we started this process, is very different from a university that have allowed this kind of race science.
The bones of the skull are the Using a complex set of analysis and broad community consultation, the experts zeroed in on a narrative and storyline, which points to the individuals being of Khoi and San origin. They also showed that there were 7 adults and 2 children, with at least 2 showing an untimely death, and all showing dental problems, which was the leading cause of death before modern dentistry. A lot of work also went into reconstructing their features as well.
The facial reconstruction was in essence a process that we did in conjunction with face labs. We took some pictures of the skulls, where we had 8 of the individuals had skulls in the collection. We took pictures of them, and then Face Lab, in essence, built up the faces from the Eastern Cape. And so
there was also a dual process of identification as well. Community consultation was key in finding what is thought to be their last known living relatives.
Obviously, when it started off initially, it was very shocking and very sad history to learn as well. So we had to deal with that trauma as well and experiencing that overwhelming emotions. But seeing the restorative process undertaken by the university and taking us on this journey of self-discovery as well, you know, I think that has matured us in understanding that what we are doing today would actually benefit society in the future much greater.
Overall, the entire process has been widely lauded as a success that has shown the true value of science-based restorative justice in South Africa, which has set a precedent around the world. The remains are expected to be buried in February next year, which will not only bring an end to the restitution process, but it says families are getting some sort of closure. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Well, let's now go to Penina Karibe for a look at the day's business news. Penina.
Thank you, Beatrice. Coming up on Africa Live Business. Senegalese-American musician Akon seeks to empower Africa through cryptocurrency. And African farmers challenged to transition to sustainable food and agricultural systems to fight climate change.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
American Senegalese pop singer Akon has confirmed that he will be launching his own cryptocurrency dubbed Akon. The renowned musician aims to empower young African entrepreneurs and strengthen the continent's rising economies while supporting the development of sustainable communities. CGTN's Wilkis Tanyabwa filed the following reports.
Well, good morning. Goddamn.
The Senegalese-American singer plans to launch his cryptocurrency, Akon, to explicitly focus on long-term success in the African markets.
Well, it's interesting because crypto came in by accident the same way energy came in by accident. It all stemmed through being a musician. You know, you start becoming hugely successful, you start to travel, and then you start visiting home, and then you start to realize how many things could be changed or how many things that you can impact to create change. And that's how it all started.
With Africa accounting for 15% of the world's population, the continent has vast resources that could alleviate poverty. The entrepreneur's personal experiences prompted the need to find his own market-based solution.
This all really stemmed from me having basic francs. They call it CFA, which is Senegalese dollars that's printed by French. Now, the French printed this money. It's why it's called the French. And I took the money out of Senegal and flew into Paris. When I got to Paris, I was trying to exchange my francs. Mind you, this money is made by the French, and exchange it for euros. And they told me they don't accept it. I'm like, what the? You guys made this money. You mean to tell me? You mean to tell me the money you made for us has no value in the country that made it?
Although the project is currently in beta testing, Akon hopes the currency will become the dominant form of tender in the continent. Notably, it will face some tough competition from other digital currencies such as Libra, which is also expected to be rolled out in early 2020.
It's very clear that Africa's future solution is going to be created by Africans. Mainly because I think a lot of big Fortune 500 companies and big, huge names of technology hubs, they don't really know Africa. They've never been there. They don't understand how people live, how people think, and more than anything, there's no connection.
The coin also aims to root out the core of Africa's woes, corruption, which has deterred economic growth in the continent. With the crypto market experiencing volatility in recent times, Akon hopes to circumvent the extreme fluctuations experienced by other currencies such as Bitcoin. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
African farmers must transition to sustainable food and agricultural systems if the continent is to fight climate change. That's the message from an event in Addis Ababa organized by the campaign group, the Alliance of Food and Sovereignty in Africa. It says future resilience will require farmers shifting to natural methods of agricultural production. Currently, many farmers in Africa depend on the use of chemicals for production. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports.
Farmer Paul Biaruhanga left his home in western Uganda because the land had been degraded by deforestation. In central Uganda, where he farms now, he has developed an innovation, using crushed charcoal mixed with compost manure.
When I use it in the soil, it means
water will always be there, even if it is during the dry season. Because water will be in the soil, the temperatures in the soil will be moderate. Then there will be nutrients.
Paul is part of the Alliance for Food and Sovereignty in Africa, a platform of African farmers. They argue that climate change is best tackled by taking good care of the soil.
This is a state of emergency, and governments really need to start to treat this as an emergency. And as you might know that African governments have agreed that 10% of their budgets need to be allocated towards agriculture. But the kind of investment that's being made with the 10% is supporting an industrial agriculture that depletes the soil, that impoverishes farmers, that destroys the environment, that actually makes climate the crisis that we're talking about.
The impacts of climate change have been felt in the continent through drought, floods, and cyclones. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, high external input and resource-intensive agricultural systems have contributed to deforestation, water scarcity, biodiversity loss, soil depletion, and high levels of greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture activists say farmers have always been innovators and just need support from governments to help them use natural methods of production.
There is a lot of usage of agrochemicals, which are not good for the climate. Nitrogen-based agrochemicals are much worse than carbon dioxide, as you know. There is a focus on improved varieties, which implies that seed in the hands of farmers is not improved, because it is an outcome of thousands of years of improvement, even the farmers. There is a focus on land grabbing, taking the land from people. And also there is a focus on so many techniques, including irrigation and whatever. So that productivity paradigm, that focus on productive production alone, is causing a lot of calamities, and it's not resilient.
They also argue that consumers have a big role to play. The researchers say that if people consume more healthy food, then farmers will be encouraged to change their production systems to more natural styles to meet the demand. Some in the industry would argue that agriculture needs to use some chemicals and non-natural techniques to produce yields which can feed Africa's growing population. But this meeting in Addis wraps up on 7th November, by which time farmers here hope to present climate-friendly policies to African governments. Colette Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
To South Africa now, where businesses have pledged billions of dollars in investment to the country's ailing economy. At the just concluded second South Africa Investment Conference, the country secured over $25 billion in expenditure. That gathering is part of the government's drive to garner $100 billion in investments over the next 5 years.
The key issue is not to talk about the same thing over and over again, but to do something about what you have agreed you're going to do. And that's how you get progress. And so, as I say, we're setting up this blended infrastructure fund, which will be in the business of doing things. In the process of doing things, we also must be humble enough to understand that there are certain things we don't have the know-how about. And therefore go to the world and seek the know-how to work with us, unashamedly. And it's in that way, I think, that what you say, promise, possibilities, become realized. Now, we have identified already a number of projects. Some are at an advanced stage. And by the time we meet again next year, we shouldn't be talking about projects which have been identified last year, which have not been implemented.
The 2019 Diamond market has had a mixed year. The latest sales and production revision by De Beers underscore a tough period for the sector. That's particularly so for African countries that depend heavily on diamond sales for a significant proportion of their exports, as well as contributions to the GDP. CGTN's Angelo Coppola explains.
Africa is responsible for some 50% of all diamond production, but how can this be leveraged to the benefit of African countries?
We are calling for more collaboration between the countries in the region, between the government, between the other stakeholders from that region, and even between the companies who are operating in our countries.
The AU is a collaborative effort aimed at developing the continent on many levels.
You've got so many different countries, and therefore you can decide to say, for this particular reason, country A maybe should be a center for trading. Country B can be a center for polishing. Country B can, whatever it is actually you choose to have. And therefore I think that's where we start looking at, not only probably regionally, but also I think it's a continent-wide collaboration. I think that you can think about it.
We have to be open to each other. If we are open to each other, it will be possible. If not, it will not be possible.
When it comes to collaboration in country, that's a different case. Botswana is a prime and working example.
I think within country, yes. The industry is such that if you don't collaborate, it's going to be a mess. And I think there's enough mutual benefits that collaboration makes sense.
My shareholders are the Namibian people. And the Namibian people need to have the sense that actually they are getting something out of their resource. And I also understand that the shareholder, the investment shareholder, also need to get something out of it. Now, for that to happen, for both people, the stakeholder to have something, you need to have that collaboration.
The diamond sector is known as a very secretive sector, and for collaboration to work, some of those secrecy levels have to be dropped down a little to let new entrants in. If that doesn't happen, collaboration won't. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Gaborone, Botswana.
Let's head to Senegal, where the country is continuing to grow its agricultural partnership with China. Students from the Confucius Institute in Dakar's Sheikh Anta Diop University will get a chance to take part in a special training program.
For the next 3 months, these 38 university students will take part in a special agriculture program. Chinese agri-experts will train them in agricultural theories and practices.
I hope students will get a better understanding of agriculture after receiving our theory and practice training.
The programs will be tailor-made to correspond with Senegal's soil and weather conditions. They will also learn to grow the country's major agricultural exports, like peanuts.
This mission is very important because it shows us what can be done with what we have. Because it's not about bringing seeds from Chinese, fertilizers from China, or agricultural inputs. No, everything is taken from here and with what we find here.
The program's participants are excited to kick things off.
Knowing the importance of agriculture in the development of a country, we are committed to be helpful to the nation and participate in the development of our dear Senegal.
The training program will take place from November 2019 to January 2020. Astatal, CGTN.
We shall leave it there for now, but later on Global Business, we'll be talking about the South Africa Investment Conference, the hits and the misses. That will be at the top of the hour, and I shall see you then. For now, it's back to you, Beatrice.
Penina, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. Conservationists translocate 15 giraffes to eastern Uganda in a bid to boost tourism.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Uganda hopes to boost its tourism and wildlife conservation by relocating giraffes to an area in the east of the country where they became extinct more than 20 years ago. 15 Rothschild giraffes have been moved to Pian Upe Reserve in Karamoja region, where other species of wildlife roam the plains. Isabel Nakiria with that story.
Conservationists released 15 giraffes to the Pian Upe Reserve in eastern Uganda. They were brought here from the Murchison National Park in the country's northwest.
With this move, we're helping to repopulate this protected area, which once held one of Uganda's largest populations of giraffe. With this conservation translocation, we're hoping to restore the ecological function that these large mega herbivores once provided to this system, and in doing so, we also hope to increase the tourism value here.
Giraffes were wiped out from Pian Upe Reserve due to poaching. Tribal communities hunt them for their meat, hides and tails. It's hoped bringing them back could help boost tourism. Tourism is one of top leading revenue earners, bringing in about $1.4 billion.
It is a nice place to be, I'm sure, for tourists, and therefore it was important that we make sure that there is enough wildlife for tourists to come and see. But that aside also it enhances the conservation value of the protected area.
Uganda has around 1,700 giraffes, but the number could increase as a result of the translocation exercise. Giraffes are considered an endangered species, and that's why conservationists are trying to spread them out in all game reserves. Conservationists say it's easier to wipe out an entire population if they were concentrated in one location. The Uganda Wildlife Authority says it's sensitizing communities about the importance of conserving wildlife. Some animals, like giraffes, are also totems for some communities, and conservationists hope this time round the giraffes will be treated with dignity. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Let's go musical now. And the standard guitar is played with 6 strings. But in Botswana, traditional musicians would remove 2 strings to produce a uniquely African sound. Local musician Tomeletso Seretsi is reviving the country's traditional 4-string instrument, combining time-honored rhythms with modern influences to produce a culturally rich and refreshing sound. Singing exclusively in his mother tongue, Setswana, the popular artist does not shy away from addressing challenging issues. Let's take a look.
I would describe it as Botswana contemporary folk. It's rooted in the traditional rhythms, you know, and the traditional song forms of Botswana. But I bring in my influences, you know, as somebody who grew up on you know, pop, you know, and jazz and classical music and blues and all these other Western influences. But at the very heart of it, at the core of the sound, is just this traditional, you know, cultural heritage. For me, it's really been important to sing in Setswana because it's also a way of keeping the language alive. You know, you meet somebody and says to you, you know, I thought my sense of being Botswana, I thought I lost it all, but I heard your music and I was like, wow, this is what it sounds like to be a Botswana. Like, for me, that was like one of the biggest compliments I've ever heard, is somebody saying your music is the soundtrack to what it is to be a Botswana today. I have a song called Robert, which also happens to be my most, I think, famous song. It's a story about a brother who wants to marry another brother, you know, which is kind of a controversial subject here at home, but I think gradually people are warming up to the subject. It was important that I write a song like that because I believe that it's the function of art to not to make people comfortable all the time and dance, but also to make people think and also to face some of these difficult subjects. For me, music is a feeling, you know, before it's even about words, you know. We talk about how people are numb nowadays, you know. So music, I feel, is just one of those things that allow people to feel. For me, that's beauty.
And let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. The Springboks present Webb Ellis Trophy to President Cyril Ramaphosa as they begin a Rugby World Cup trophy parade in Pretoria.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa.